Welcome to the Massachusetts School of Law Educational Forum. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Diane Sullivan. Moving up in America, pursuing the American dream. This is a topic near and dear to our hearts and the mission of our law school. For we believe that intelligent people who work enormously hard can achieve anything that they desire. Education drives upward mobility. From an early age on, our parents instilled in us that in order to get ahead, you need to get an education and you need to work hard. Is that still possible today, or is the American dream dying? Rana Foroohar, assistant managing editor of Time magazine, wrote an interesting article on this subject entitled, "Whatever Happened to Upward Mobility?"
Well, I think the idea of being an opportunity society is crucial to our self-image as Americans. It's what this nation was built on. Many of our families, certainly my family, my father was an immigrant, my grandparents, people come here thinking that they're going to have an easier way up the socioeconomic ladder than their parents did. And I think that that's what America is known for here and abroad.
Do you believe that the American dream, as we all knew it growing up, is still very much alive today?
I think that a lot of people still believe in the dream. They believe that they can strive for the dream. We did a poll, actually, a Time Money Magazine poll last year, asking people about the American dream. And even though everyone believes that their children can still have it, a lot of people feel that they themselves cannot have it. And I think the statistics show that the dream is getting harder.
You write in your article that as long as people are working hard and they believe that they can get ahead, that social inequality in the present term does not bother them because it's this dream, this Christmas tomorrow, that makes people more complacent or more optimistic. I wonder if you'd comment on that.
Well, I think you've hit on a really important point, which defines so much of our political and state structures in this country. There is a belief, and you can see it in surveys, that as long as we've got a shot at being rich, we don't mind if there's a lot of inequality. We don't mind if there's the Henry Kravitzes and the Koch brothers, you know, as long as we can have our McMansion too. But that gap, that belief starts narrowing. When you feel that the system is rigged, then people start worrying a lot more about inequality.
Discuss, if you would, the significance of Occupy Wall Street. What did that mean in our culture?
Wow, I think it meant so much. I was shocked, to be honest, as somebody that covers economics and business, that it didn't happen a lot earlier. We were all waiting, all of us, after the fall of Lehman Brothers, for there to be mass protests, and we all wrote these sort of, you know, we're all socialists now covers, and that didn't come to pass. But I think that after a few years, the patience of even Americans that are willing to put up with a lot in terms of inequality was exhausted, and I think that's what you saw in these movements.
What evidence either supports or refutes the idea that it is harder to get ahead today?
Well, there's been a number of studies done, or studies that I should say have been done over the last several decades that are now being reported on, looking at intergenerational mobility. And what that means is taking a person from the time that they're coming of age and coming into the workplace until the time that they have children, so about a 20-year period, and looking at whether they're doing better, worse, the same than their parents. And what those statistics show us is that America is falling behind, particularly in comparison to Europe, which I think is really interesting, because if we think again, to go back to the Statue of Liberty, to the generations before us, that's why people came to America. They thought it was going to be easier here.
One other important point that you make is that if you were born in 1970, in the bottom 1/5 of the socioeconomic ladder, you are far less likely to get ahead than you would have at one time.
Yeah.
I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so if you were to be in that bottom quartile in the, say, the 50s, it would have been a lot easier to get ahead than it would be if you started out in the 70s and went till today. And I think that that reflects a kind of mega shift in our economy. The period of highest growth in most of our lifetimes was from the 50s to the 70s. It was the post-war era. Europe was rebuilding. America was surging ahead. There was a tremendous amount of consolidation, growth in American industry, but globalization hadn't really taken off yet.
Right.
Once you hit the 70s, and in particular the late 70s, you start getting a lot of other countries coming online. You know, you get the emerging markets, China, you get Eastern Europe, you get a little bit later on, you get the fall of the Soviet Union and all those countries coming in. And of course, people in those places want theirs as well, but then that means many billions of more people that we have to compete with.
Are people today better off or worse off than their parents?
Well, it's interesting. There's two ways to look at it. You can look at it in absolute figures, which a lot of economists will, to be fair, and then we have to say we're better off. We actually do have more money than our parents. We have many technologies that they didn't have. I mean, you know, look at our flat screen televisions and our snazzy refrigerators and things like that. But if you look at it in relative terms, a lot of people would say that we're not as well off, and I think relative is what matters, because as I write in the article, we don't peg ourselves to our parents, we peg ourselves to the Joneses.
Will you talk a little bit about the divide between the richest and the poorest in America today?
I'm going to refer to Coming Apart again because I do think it's a very interesting look, and this is someone he's on the right. I tend to think of myself more as a liberal, but I think that some interesting points are being made, in that there's an entire cultural divide now between the upper middle class and the upper classes in this country and the working class, in terms of education, which is the base of the pyramid. That's where it all starts, yes. Really, because education is, you know, as you know, is the #1 factor in terms of mobility. If you don't have that, your chances of getting up the ladder really are slim. So these people are more highly educated. Their lives are different. They tend to get married and stay married more than, say, a working class person would. No moral judgment on that, but what it does mean is they tend to be richer. You tend to be not operating with one income. You tend to have more stability. There's all different sorts of ways in which their lives are different. Their habits are different. Their political values are different. So we're really creating a bifurcated society here, and I do think that that's a risk for democracy.
What about the real estate market? How has that impacted things?
That's a huge missing link that I think people don't speak enough about. So, you know, there was a lot of talk during the Clinton administration and later in the book years of creating an opportunity society by allowing people to buy homes. And certainly while home ownership has been an important part of the American dream, as we all know, there were an unfortunate number of flawed mortgages given to people, often fraudulently on the part of the banks, who couldn't afford them. The government, in some cases knowingly, pushed these policy ideas out because they wanted this debt to cover up this long-term problem of the hollowing middle that has been happening since the late 1970s. Basically, since the 70s, wages in this country and every other rich country in the world have been flat. And we've been trying to hide that with debt, and we can't do it anymore.
Another area that you write about that's near and dear to my heart, that is the loss of manufacturing jobs. Like you, my family were immigrants, and social mobility happened for us because my parents went to work in the mills in the city of Fitchburg. Those jobs don't exist anymore.
Well, absolutely. I mean, my father is a Turkish immigrant. He was given he was from a very poor family, peasant family really, in Turkey. He was given a scholarship to study in this country and became an engineer. This plays to some other aspects that maybe we'll come to later, but long story short, he went into the manufacturing business in the Midwest. He was part of the auto components field. He was laid off later when that area was hollowed out in the 80s. He was at an advantage in the sense that he had a college degree and was able to later start a small business,
yes.
But certainly, and that's an important issue too in all of this, but certainly we felt, being in the Midwest and, you know, hearing stories from my grandparents who had it harder. They didn't have college degrees, they were immigrants as well, that this was a big issue. I mean, the death of these industries where you could work often without having a college degree has had a tremendous impact, I think.
Talking about technology and how the technology-driven economy has changed things in the past decade?
That's an area that I think people are just beginning to explore the enormous implications of. Now, I think we all have an idea that technology has hollowed out manufacturing. We can all imagine complex machines that have taken the place of workers, but what I think we don't have a clue about yet is the fact that it's going to hollow out white-collar jobs. You know, I'm a journalist, there are now software programs that are being used to write wire copy. You know, I mean, there's almost no job that you can think of that can't in some way be touched and reshaped by this. There's actually a fantastic book by a couple of MIT academics called Race Against the Machine. And these are guys from MIT, right? They're all about technology, but they're raising the point that even though we can look and see that technology has been a net job creator so far, they feel that we may be at the point now where it's going to become a net job destroyer across a number of industries. And that's pretty profound, I think.
You write that America's best hope is to improve education. Talk about that.
I think education, as I said, is the bottom rung on the ladder. It's at the base of this entire pyramid. Studies have shown that it is the factor that has the most implications for mobility. If you have a leg up in this way, if you can afford an education, which many people can't in this country, as we know, you can generally get ahead. You can improve your situation. If you can't, increasingly you won't be able to. And I think what we need to do is start thinking about it all across the board. I mean, not only do we need to make it easier for people to complete four-year degrees and professional degrees, but we also need to make it easier for people to learn skills in trade schools, in universities that connect with employers. I'm actually going out in a couple of weeks to visit a high school in Brooklyn, a technical high school, which is a 6-year high school that actually you start it when you're 14 and you end up after 6 years with an associate's degree.
Wow.
So, you know, because as I'm sure that you know, dropout rates for community colleges and associate's programs are often very high. But if you can get these kids in, and it's part of their high school education then, they are guaranteed a job with one of the major employers, including IBM, for example, that support this program. So I think that kind of thing we need to start talking more about.
What impact does healthcare have on poverty?
I think it's a big impact. It's an impact that's very difficult to measure. And one of the interesting things that's coming out in poverty research more and more is it's not so much about absolute income. You can't say if you're below X dollar figure, you're poor, and if you're above it, you're not. Volatility in the lives of people that fall into poverty is oftentimes a more important factor. So, for example, healthcare emergencies in this country. I mean, in Massachusetts, things are better than in a lot of states,
Yes.
you know. But something like a third, actually, I think it is a third of people who fall into poverty, in and out of poverty on a yearly basis, it's because of a healthcare emergency. They can't pay their medical bills. I mean, and this kind of thing is unthinkable in Europe, where I spent many years as a correspondent and thankfully had 2 children on the state healthcare system there.
Well, I wanted to talk for a moment about Europe's higher spending on social safety nets and how that has bolstered their economy.
Well, we could talk about 2 things on that front, healthcare and education. I think the fact that people have a baseline level of state-funded healthcare means that they don't have these kind of healthcare emergencies that then push them into poverty and become more expensive, because then, of course, you have people going to the emergency room, you have people that need to go on social services, etc. Education, though, is another important factor. When you look at these studies from places like Pew and Brookings that are finding how a number of Western and Northern European countries are now more socially mobile than the U.S., you often find that a big factor is state-funded education. Because, you know, kids here, you can be really smart, but if you're poor, you're stuck, you know? And with the Pell Grants going and, you know, a lot of things making it harder and harder to get education, I think it's going to be a continuing problem.
And if you're born poor, you're much more likely to be sick and malnourished on top of everything else.
Absolutely.
What impact does our tax policy have on the problem of social inequality?
Essentially, I think what we need is a tax system more like the one that you find in Germany or France, which is simpler, okay? I mean, you know, we all know of the hundreds of pages of tax code in this country that make it easy to jump through legal hoops. The rich that have succeeded because of all the opportunities in this country need to pay their fair share. I mean, I think that you need a system in which you're going to have a high consumption tax. So if you're the kind of person that can buy 2 Cadillacs, Mr. Romney, you know, or a jet or a yacht, then you have to pay for them in a way that we don't in this country. I think that you also need to think about systems that really take the burden off of the middle and redistribute to the poor, but in areas that have that are directly touching mobility. Areas like, I would say, education first and foremost, but probably healthcare and a number of other areas as well. Any
other specific ideas on how this nation can create more opportunity?
Many of these things really do focus back on education. It was interesting because Charles Murphy actually today in the New York Times had an interesting op-ed piece about this, in which he talked about not only do we need more technical schools and a kind of a reevaluation of this idea of a 4-year degree from an Ivy League school automatically gets you a job in, you know, this and that and another great company. We need to pay everyone minimum wage, so no more unpaid internships. I mean, I have to say, working in media, which is not a particularly well-paid industry, you see a lot of people that can afford to take on unpaid internships, and then you have a leg up, whereas kids that are not as advantaged have to wait tables or do things that are not as career advancing. So I think some kind of law, I agree with him that you need to pay everyone minimum wage regardless of what kind of starter job they're in. I think a rethinking of trade and technical schools, more collaboration, kind of German style actually, between public sector, private sector, and educators. There's not enough talking, although I think there's starting to be more. I hear more about this in Washington. I think we need, I'm going to use a third rail word here, but sort of industrial policy light, not picking industries that we want to succeed, but getting the public, the private, the educators together to talk about where are their growth opportunities.
It'd be great if more and more cities, municipalities, and companies could get together and do this type of thing.
It would be, and it's the norm elsewhere in the world, so it should be here too.
You have spoken about China, you've spoken a little bit about Europe generally. Talk to us about Canada. What lessons can we learn from our neighbors in Canada?
That's a great question. Well, two come to mind immediately. First, healthcare. They do more at a national level to make sure that there's a baseline of care. You don't have kind of volatile healthcare emergencies like you do here. But secondly, their banking system is actually much more sensible than the U.S. They were one of the few countries, rich countries, that haven't had a banking crisis. They have much smarter banking regulations. So I think we could look at their financial system and learn something.
Final question. You have children. Will they do better than you have done?
I hope so. I hope so. It's interesting. I go back to the point about pegging ourselves to the Joneses, pegging ourselves to people around us. I grew up, I would say, very middle class in Indiana, and my mother was a teacher and my father was an engineer, and I felt like we had a lot for the neighborhood that we lived in. I grew up, my kids are growing up in New York around people that are very, very wealthy and people that are very poor. So they have different expectations, but I hope that gives them a sense that we're all in this together, as we are in this city and this country.
Associate Dean of the Massachusetts School of Law, Michael L. Coyne, asked a few of his students their thoughts on whether it's possible to move up today.
Oh, I think the American dream is far from dead. I certainly think that I'm living it right now, and I would have never thought that I'd be sitting here speaking to a dean of a law school after coming to the United States from the Dominican Republic in 1986 as a child. It's been a long ride, and it's not over yet.
When did you learn to speak English?
Well, when I came to Lawrence, I don't think they had a bilingual program such as now. So it was really sink or swim. And I remember there was one lady who came and took me out of the classroom for about an hour a day, and they called it Chapter 1. And I think that helped me transition, and within 1 year, I actually learned how to speak English enough to defend myself, and then go down from there.
And so then you finished grade school, went on to college, and ultimately law school. Who's the driver there? Who's motivating you to keep progressing and moving on and telling you that you can accomplish these things?
Well, initially, it starts at the home.
Right.
My mom and dad always believed that I could do anything I really wanted to. And education was a topic every single day, every single month, every single year, even during the summers. But now that I'm older, obviously, they've instilled that drive in me. So the man in the mirror, that's the drive right now.
Tell me about law school. How did you then say, okay, maybe I'll give law school a try? Because again, it's a pretty rapid journey from the Dominican to where we're at today.
Well, again, it was a combination of things. After going to school at Ithaca College in upstate New York.
Did you enjoy Ithaca?
Oh, I loved it. I would go back right now. I would go back right now. It was such a great 4 years. As you can imagine, a kid from Lawrence just pretty much knowing the outskirts of Lawrence and not traveling anywhere. Overnight, I was in a campus. It was gorgeous.
Beautiful, beautiful campuses between Cornell and Ithaca.
Oh,
It's gorgeous.
I think it was wonderful 4 years. If I can go back right now, I would definitely do it.
Did that really give you the drive to do better academically, to keep pushing when you were in such a strong academic environment as you'd find in Ithaca?
The way I see it is, a different part of the world was exposed.
Mm-hmm.
I remember just seeing not only the facilities, the buildings, and even the gymnasium, but seeing how professors interacted and being around students that really challenged you because they wanted to get a higher grade than you. So once that seed was planted, there was no looking back. I knew that I was within the grasp of success.
So then you go to work after college and you're bumping up against the glass ceiling and you say there's got to be something more for you on your horizon here.
I mean, you see it every day. You turn on the TV and you see politicians or people trying to change the world in other different ways. And then when you apply it to your own expectations, you say, well, I know I can do better. Right. And to make a long story short, I found myself at a crossroads where I said, there has to be more. I've gotten this far. I know I can attain another level. And the funny story is that a friend of mine, about 3 years prior to me applying here, he invited me to come to an open house. And I said, okay, yeah, why not? And I wasn't even thinking about law school back then. And I sat in the old courtroom, and I heard you guys speak. And I said, oh, well, that sounds nice. And another seed was planted. And lo and behold, 3 years later, I found myself applying because I remember the opportunities that were described. And now that we're on the topic, during my first week of orientation, I still remember you said to the whole class, don't blow this opportunity. And those words have still resonated within my head.
Even in law school, I know you faced additional challenges, not academic, but I knew you were in a serious accident. And,
I was.
There had to be a lot of different opportunities, not just that, where you just could have packed it in and said, you know what, I can do something else. What keeps you driving, even after the serious accident I know you were in?
Sure. Well, I should mention that when I was in high school, my mom became ill, and she wasn't around. She became incapacitated, and she passed in 2007. And that was a very sad day, but that point in my life seemed so low that I really needed to bring myself up in any way I can. So when things get hard, I think of how hard I've had it before, and how much higher I can bring myself up. You mentioned the accident. The school was marvelous. They allowed me to have an extension on one of my papers because I couldn't type because I hurt my hand. So I had to use one finger. And you're right, I could have packed it in. I could have said, this isn't for me, this is too hard. And it wasn't easy. But you have to look at the adversities that you have. You have to look at how bad you feel sometimes in your life. And then you have to say, I can do so much better. And you have to turn every negative situation and turn it into a positive. Frederick Douglass says, without struggle, there is no progress. Nothing can be further from the truth.
Now tell me what the plan is for the next 5 or 10 years.
I want to be an administrator. I can see what higher education has done for me. Mm-hmm. And I've had some exposure to that a little bit. And I really want to be the driving force behind a university or a college. And I want to be the person that says, let's go after it. Let's be better. Let's make each and every one of those students who come to our program better, because education has made my life better.
Who are your influences that encourage you to think bigger, to go beyond, to go to college, to go beyond college, to go to law school?
Well, starting off with my family, my mother, she's from the Caribbean, and my father, he's from America, of course. But growing up, they always instilled in us that you can do all things through Christ, that you can be the change in this world, not just make a difference, but be the difference. So starting with my family, my church family, and my teachers and community.
Is church a significant influence in your life, your activities, the way in which you live?
Yes, through church growing up, speaking, having the opportunity to participate in the community, doing debate, oratorical speaking, working with young kids, I always did that. So I always had a vision that I wanted to not only deal with children, but I had an opportunity to do it in church, so starting from that point of view.
Do you see both your church activities and your law school and higher education goals? Is that the way to obtain the social mobility, to find the next rung up the ladder?
Well, with my church, the congregation, the Church of Christ, it gave me a foundation of discipline, of regardless of the obstacles that you face, that you can stay focused in the midst of your storms. So being in law school, just having that mindset, no matter what happens, you can stay focused and being driven and know that people love you and care and will support you no matter what happens. So it starts from that point of view.
What do you tell other people when they say, you know, that whole hope of the American dream is a fallacy, is that, you know, you've got to be from a certain group, a certain class, and have a certain education to be able to achieve in this society? You think that's true?
Well, growing up in the South, in Florida, and coming up here, I see the complete difference with the American dream. A lot of young students, I would say, would have that vision that I can only get this far because I'm black or because I'm a female. However, if you have all the capacities, the education, and if you have the motivation to keep the end in mind first, and take those steps to get there, you will get there no matter what.
How do you achieve success?
Well, it starts off from my prayer, spiritual aspect, prayer and having faith to know that regardless of what obstacles are placed before me, whether it's school, whether it's finances, whether it's employment, that there is something bigger and something brighter at the end of the day. There is the light at the end of the tunnel. And what I do, I keep in mind of where I want to be. If I want to be the Supreme Court Justice, the first African-American woman, then I have to take the necessary steps to do that. So by going to law school, MSL, by staying focused, by getting involved, by talking to people, and also networking in those opportunities, and staying focused in my studies, and also just making sure that I have the goals in the back of my head, it helps me to get to where I want to be. In mock trial, the same thing, preparation. You have to practice. And it's not just practice, it's perfect practice that makes perfect.
Tell me how you juggle everything you do, because I've been talking to a few people, and it really appears to me to the old adage that if you want to get something done, give it to a busy person. And to a large extent, as you know, to me, you embody that. You were head of the Black Law Students Association at Mass School of Law. You're head of the Barristers, which is a public service organization where you go out and assist the less fortunate one time a month. I know you've been extraordinarily active on the trial advocacy teams. You're extraordinarily active with respect to your church and the public service that they do. You do law school. I don't know what else you do. I assume you have some type of personal life.
Somewhat. How do I balance, to be honest, Dean Coyne? I don't know. I just know it's by the grace of God. It's about giving back. When you go to Barristers to feed the homeless, it's like seeing the smiles on their faces. It's when you're working with children, interning in the court, you're seeing the difference and the change needed. So with me, it's like if I see a need, I always just naturally try to do it or get it done. And not wait for other people, because if you wait on someone, it may not happen. So instead of, like I said, instead of trying to make the difference, it's be the difference so that others will be influenced by what you do and get on fire and do it too.
You see, you attribute a lot of your success to God. I mean, and you're not embarrassed by it. You're very out there with it, right?
Right.
Is it that significant of an influence? Does it carry you through those rough times? Does it keep you striving ever higher? Is it that much of a power in your life?
My faith and my belief in God is what keeps me through. It's what I believe wakes me up in the morning with the drive that I'm going to do something positive today. And it's what helps me in the midst of the day when it's not going well. When things are negatively coming at my way, it's my balance. So my faith in God, it secures me in my foundation because I know that I'm not just anyone, but I am extraordinary. I am unique, and there's just no one like me. And because of that, and because of God and Christ was like that way, it's easier to live in this society.
Well, your parents must have instilled a little bit of that confidence in you too, so they've obviously done a terrific job.
We have to give them credit, and I have a brother and a sister, and they're all doing exceptionally well, and it's because my parents always said, well, we gave our life to help you. And by giving their life, they would sacrifice. Growing up, they did a lot of sacrificing so that we can go to the debate tournaments when we may not have the money, or they can work an extra job. And they always instill education is the key. Education is successful. You know, whenever you have it, you can go anywhere. You can move mountains. And faith and education, you know, that's a combination together.
Do you think the opportunity for education will continue to exist for the young Felicias and the young Mikes and everyone else, because the cost of education, people start to worry that the cost of education is just skyrocketing, and that window of opportunity for people like us it may well be closing as it grows ever more expensive. What do you think about that?
I think once we, as a society, as a country, we stop and we understand the importance of education and how it not only affects young people, but it affects the entire society as a whole, we will realize why it's important, why we need to finance it, why we need to provide resources in communities that don't have the educational resources. And I saw that growing up in the South versus up north. It's completely different with the educational system. And I think that's what makes us who we are. That's what embodies us as American citizens. And being able to go into the employment, you want a job done. You don't want to just give it to anyone, but you want to give it to someone who's competent and who's confident to get it done, and it's through education.
What would you say to the little kids out there that say, I want to be like her? And there's someone saying, well, you can't be a lawyer, you're whatever, you can't go to college. What do you say to that kid to help them overcome some of those obstacles that are likely in their way?
I will say, like my parents said to me and my grandparents, don't be like me, be better than me. And I only use that because there are a number of people I know growing up that says, you can't be a lawyer, you can be a teacher. And that's what I had in my mind. I was going to teach because you're not going to, you know, be this high up in life, and only women can do certain things. And that kind of discouraged me. But then I thought about it as I went through college. I'm like, no, I don't want to be a teacher. I want to be a lawyer. So therefore, you have to get the negativity out of the way, and you have to stay focused on your dreams. And like I said before, if you keep the end in mind, you will go forward.
Since I was younger, I've been a pretty competitive person, and I think I like to do a lot of things that people tell me I can't do, especially from the standpoint of being in a disability in a wheelchair. I think I've had to overcome a lot of adversity, and that competitive edge, being an inspiration to other people with disabilities, is something that pushes me to keep going and do more and more.
Let me ask you about that. I mean, because you weren't always in a wheelchair.
I wasn't.
That had to be, for anyone, but especially someone young and vibrant like yourself, that had to be a real adjustment. I mean, a lot of people might have just said, I'm going to pack it in, but your drive, at least from what I've seen, your drive seems to be ever present.
It was a huge downfall in my life, I guess you could say. But I really didn't start using a wheelchair until I was 22. So I have a progressive disease, and you know, from the time I was maybe 16 or 17, I started like losing balance and having to, you know, hold on to things. So in a way, when I was 22, it was almost a relief to be in a wheelchair, because I could, you know, I could be independent again, and I could do the things I wanted to do again. So that was kind of nice.
Some people say that the American dream, the promise of America, is no longer a reality. What do you think it is?
I think the American dream is a reality, especially for me. I think, you know, I've always chased that competitive feeling and being able to be in law school and pursue a legal profession, being able to do something that I like and get paid for it. I mean, that's a huge plus. That's the American dream right there.
Do you see education as, if not the way out, one of the most significant avenues out for people from more modest backgrounds?
I think so. I think going to college is definitely the first step, and things have obviously changed since my parents were, younger. Now you really have to get an advanced degree, so education is really important. And I think about myself, if I didn't have a disability, if I wasn't, pursuing all these things, I don't know, honestly, that I would have gone to college or I would have gone to law school. So I'm really thankful that I did do that, because now I realize that it is so important to pursue an education.
You are now the city councilor of another older mill city.
Yes.
And there's an awful lot of other people that within that city that you now represent that are also trying to find their way up that social ladder, that the next rung up.
Right.
What advice would you give to them as to how to get out from the situation they see themselves in now?
I think, pursuing something, pursuing anything, really, you gotta have some kind of drive. Find something you like and just go for it. And I think that's really important, because when you do find something you like, you are competitive and you do have that drive. And I think that's what's going for me now. I mean, it's sitting in college and, sitting in high school and taking classes you don't necessarily like or want to pursue. It's tough, it really is, and I think a lot of people are turned off by that. But if you find something you really like, you pursue it, you go hard, and you don't give up.
What impediments have you faced and overcome along the way that you now look back on and say, well, geez, I thought that was an obstacle I'd never get past, but perseverance and the like, I got past it?
I think the biggest thing, as we talked about before, was going into a wheelchair, and getting past that, I don't know. It was really hard to do, and the week I actually got my wheelchair, the way I think I got over it, I bought a cycle, a hand cycle, the next day, or the week after. I'm sorry, and I just really got into sports, started meeting people, and before I never was interested in talking to anyone about my disability or meeting anyone with disabilities. Just made me uncomfortable. Like, I think it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, actually. And so yeah, I bought the cycle and I started meeting people, and that was empowerment right there.
What about the whole idea with respect to politics? I mean, that has to be just another level of challenge that, I mean, most of us would have trouble speaking in public to strangers, period. You're a relatively young kid. You've still got law school. You've got all these other responsibilities. And now you embrace another difficult challenge that most people would avoid. How come?
I've always liked helping people, doing what I can. And I think from a young age, middle school, high school, I did, student council and student government, and same in college. But when I was 15, I worked on a council that followed Robert's rules and everything. It was in the Boy Scouts, in a group called the Order of the Arrow. And I became a vice chief, which was, you basically run all the elections and you go to all the troops and you give a presentation. And I think at that age, I was 15, I mean, it really annoyed my parents that they drove me to, every city in Central Mass every Tuesday and Thursday night, but that definitely got me started in where I wanted to be in the future.
What would you see as your future in public service? What would you like to accomplish if you have all your wishes?
You know, I ran for city council on the platform that I don't want to pursue politics on a national level. I really want to pursue law, and I want to pursue maybe disability rights at some point. And I definitely want to work for Fitchburg out of a love for the city, but I don't see myself moving on. Maybe, you know, state rep or senator for my district, but not Congress or the actual Senate or anything like that.
Do you have any advice that you would give other people who are watching this and saying, oh, I don't think I can do law school, I don't think I can run for politics, I don't think, just let someone else worry about all that stuff?
If you like it, do it. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. Law school is one of the hardest things I've ever done. You know, running for politics against two candidates who I was told from the start would beat me. You know, these things are hard, but if it's something you really want, if it's something you're eager for, pursue it.
When my parents divorced, we moved to Lewiston, which is a totally different town from where I had grown up. It was a small community in Green, Maine, farm country. And then when we moved to Lewiston, it was the big city. And so I was getting into trouble. I was kicked out of school in the 8th grade, and they assigned me to high school, and I never even went. So I worked in an old mill,
Yep.
A paper mill in Lisbon Falls, and got my GED. I think it was 1997 when I got my GED.
So you studied not in school, but you studied by books and everything else, and went to probably some classes in order to get your high school equivalency degree.
I went to class 3 times, and then I sat for the high school equivalency test, and I passed it, and just continued to work until I was 20 years old. And one of my old friends from Green, Maine was starting to come around more often, and he was telling me about college. And he just fascinated me. And I think at the same time I watched Rudy.
Yeah.
And I got a passion.
So you found the spark at 20?
Yes, I found the spark at 20. I wanted that life that he was telling me about. I remember I wrote a college essay to get into the college. It was Notre Dame College. It ended up closing down later, and I think this is the reason why I got in, because I wrote a college essay to get in there, and I littered that with collage instead of college.
Uh-huh.
I couldn't spell. I wrote collage instead of college. But they accepted me, but I believe it was because they were closing down. They needed money. And they accepted me, and I didn't do very well. The nuns would call me and make sure I was awake to come into class, because it's just, I never knew how to do math. I never knew how to do writing, because I never went to high school. I think I got lucky on the GED test, and
so a good boot in the ass from the nuns sent you on your way.
Yes, yep. They helped me. They made me, put the time in and the effort in, and then when the school closed down, the University of New England, they accepted me because I was part of the students. That was part of the deal between Notre Dame and University of New England. I would have never had the grades to get into the University of New England, but as part of the deal to get the PT students, they had to accept everybody that wanted to go.
Okay.
So I was lucky. Again, another door opened, and I took advantage of that. And
so then at some point you decide that even that's not enough after this rocky start.
yes,
You decide the college degree that you struggled to get, but now that you've got, even that wasn't enough, and you decide law school is going to be your ultimate way out of where you were at. How come?
I don't know how law school really got into the picture. The only thing I can think of is a friend of mine. We're talking. He owns a couple of mobile gas stations. He's pretty successful, and he's always told me that I'm one of the smartest people he's ever met, but there's just something not connected right in my brain, and that law school would probably fix that. And I think he was right, because I feel law school has done so many things for me. I mean, I just graduated, but I feel different about the world. I see it differently because of law school.
Now, tell me about your struggles in law school, because not academic struggles, but there must be financial struggles, there must be time constraints. You were actually commuting from Middle Maine, Central Maine would call that, to Andover, Mass.
Yes.
Whenever you had classes and were going to study here.
Yes. That was, my wife was probably the most instrumental in that. She made it so I come to school here without working. I tried to do it at first. My first semester, I'm going to be honest, I did not do very well.
You were trying to work, and you were trying to attend classes?
Yes.
And you were commuting at least an hour and a half each way?
Yes.
And somehow you couldn't juggle all
and
of
I
that?
wasn't doing very well. I was on academic probation my first semester.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
No one did, except my advisor.
So was that another boot in the rear end that you needed?
That scared me, because I've always felt like when I put my mind to something, I can accomplish it.
Right.
And this was the first time in my life where I felt like I wasn't able to do it. And I was on academic probation. I was so afraid that I wasn't going to make it. And as you guys taught us in orientation, you have to put the time in. And never in my life where somebody told me that you have to do something, you really have to do it. It wasn't just talking during orientation. That was serious. You have to put the time in. And so I ended up getting laid off from my job, which I wouldn't probably have left my job if I wouldn't have gotten laid off.
Because you couldn't afford to.
Because I couldn't afford to. And my wife, she's the smartest person I know, and she worked. She was in school too, but she had a job full time and went to school and supported us.
So she's working and going to school as well.
She's done now, but yes.
But at the time, she's working and going to school, you're working and going to school until you get laid off.
Mm-hmm.
So what's driving the two of you? Just the prospect of, when we're done this process, we're going to have a much better life than we ever could have hoped for earlier.
Well, I think that's what it exactly was. My wife grew up in Eastern Europe. She's from Bulgaria, and I grew up in Lewiston. I actually lived in a couple of homeless shelters sometimes in my life, and so we both wanted to succeed. Mm-hmm. So we didn't have to do that. We wanted to take it up to the next plateau in our lives, so we didn't have to struggle like that.
Ultimately, the first year comes, you are able to pull yourself off probation, and you figured it out now. After this rocky road, you finally figured out how you learn best, how you study, and how you can succeed at this. That must have been quite a sense of personal accomplishment.
It was, and it really showed during the finals, because I wasn't nervous. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was nervous, but not like I wasn't having a heart attack.
Yep.
But I felt a little sense of confidence, and that's what I did. That's how I had to study. I had to pretend that I wanted to be a professional and know everything about this subject in order to pass it at the end of the year. And that's what I did. I read the subject for 10 hours a day, whether it was environmental law or torts.
Do you still think that education is able to provide that opportunity that historically that was the promise of America, that with a good education you have the tools to then be able to go out and achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve?
I don't think it's a clear line anymore. I think maybe before, if you got a law degree or got any degree, not just a law degree, you were almost assured of a job and success if you put the time in during school and you got that degree. I think now it's not quite to the point where it's a diminishing return, whatever that saying is, but I think you have to be more networked, and I think you have to know people in order to get some jobs now, because they're so tight.
What advice would you give to that kid who's out there who might have been in a similar situation to you, and doesn't care about school, doesn't really think that it's going to do him much good? And what advice would you give him?
It's up to you. It's up to that child to get to where they want to be in life. If they want to be successful, no one else is going to do it for them except for yourself. So you have to find something from within. Psychologists call that resilience. If you're in a poverty or you have a hard life, but just do it. I mean, you just have to do it. You can't take the shortcuts. You can't do anything. You have to put the time in. You have to do the work. and I don't know. I mean, I don't. They have to do it. They can't take shortcuts.
Well, I think when I was a kid and I imagined myself being an attorney, it was more, I wanted to defend people because I come from a huge family. We used to run around, the yard playing with my cousins and neighbors. And I think what strikes me from my childhood is that because you were with so many kids, you had to defend each other. So I will always come out to defend the ones that were, weaker. So I felt like I was bullied as a child too. So it's like that's how I imagined it. I was the person that was coming to defend them, not with my physiques because I was always tiny, but with my arguments. And my family used to tell me, "You're going to be an attorney." So it wasn't necessarily a clear path. And when I was in college, when I was at UMass Lowell, I only went to college because I wanted to become an attorney. And then at some point there, I realized that I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure how I was going to do this. Where was I going to find the money to go to law school? And I spoke to all my professors, and they said, you don't have to. You don't have to know what you want yet. You can go find a job and figure it out as you go. And that's when I started working for Congressman Marimian as an intern. He was impressed by me and offered me a job while I was still in undergrad. And I became the immigration caseworker. And during that time, that's when I found my love and passion for immigration law and the immigrant community. So I decided that I was ready. I was ready to go to law school because I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And then maybe around that time, that's when I imagined then, yes, I'm going to have my own firm and I'm going to do immigration law. So.
Does it help doing immigration law, being not born in this country and having shared some of the same experiences as some of your clients now?
I think that it helps because you feel more connected to the cause. I'm an immigrant, so being an immigrant helps. The fact that I understand the difficulties of immigration and how people come to this country, even though I came to this country legally and my father came to this country when I was 4 years old and has lived here, most of his life. For me as an immigrant to understand the process of immigration already and how so many people come to this country in many different ways, so it is very helpful, I believe.
How difficult was the journey? I mean, there must have been stumbles and falls along the way to stick with, well, I'm going to finish college and then I'm going to pick myself up and I'm going to keep going through law school. I mean, did you always see education as sort of the way out to that better life that you were hoping to get?
Well, since I was very young, I was a student, and I loved being a student, and I loved learning. So studying was never a problem for me. My family saw me as the person who was always in school. For them, because I'm the most educated person in my entire family, and when I mean my entire family, I mean, extended family as well. So they will say to me, are you always going to be in school? When do you end? When does the school end for you? Because it wasn't what they were accustomed to. So I wouldn't say that it was easy. It wasn't an easy process, but I was so determined that it was seamless. I remember that when I finished high school here, because I came here in 1988 from the Dominican Republic, and I did 1 year of high school, my senior year. So I finished high school. I went to Northern Essex Community College to learn English. When I was learning English, I wasn't, my father wanted me to go to beauty school because he had dreams and ideas of me becoming a beauty salon owner, that I was going to be Mrs. Zoila Marisol Gomez, because I was going to have my own business. But that was his idea of success. Mm-hmm. My father's idea of success. He's a small business owner himself. So to me, that was that was thinking myself, if I became a hairdresser and a beauty shop owner, that was it. I was not going to be able to go anywhere. I was going to be stuck. So I pleased my father. I did go to beauty school, but I did not get my license. So that, because I didn't get my license, I couldn't really open a shop. So I worked for a woman, friend of mine, part-time.
And kept going to school.
Kept going to school. So I remember going to computer learning center to learn computers because I wanted to work in an office.
Mm-hmm.
I still didn't think that I could go to law school. I didn't think my English was enough. I didn't feel comfortable enough that I could hold conversations like this without stumbling. So I did a lot of different things like computer learning center. And then in 1993, I got pregnant, and my son Christopher was born in 1994. And when he was 6 months old, I said, I'm going back to school. And I went back to Northern Essex, and it was already with the focus of going to school, undergrad, to finish a 4-year degree, because I learned that I needed a 4-year degree in order to go to law school, then go to law school. So it didn't become clear right away. It kind of was something that I picked up along the way during the process of figuring out how the system worked in this country, how was I going to pay for school. So it took a while, but once I knew, it was clear.
So even with children, you continue to persevere towards the distant star of trying to be a lawyer. At some point then, you do complete law school, you complete successfully taking the bar exam, and now you're a lawyer with your own firm. And even still, now you're on the board of the University of Massachusetts. So education, you must see, is really vital to providing that, the American dream, so to speak.
I think it's very, very important. I mean, if you don't, especially for somebody like me, for somebody who's an immigrant who came to this country, you have to view it as, you have to be able to tell the parents of those children that come to this country how important education is, because they don't have that background. Most of the immigrant community, their parents didn't go to school. You don't get the immigrants who are educated coming to this country in masses. The ones who come to this country in masses are the ones who are the poor, the less educated. So I think it's very important to teach and to reinforce to the immigrant community how important it is to reinforce education in their children. And for the immigrant community to be educated, I think is the only way out of poverty.
Any advice you have to those that are out there and wanting to achieve some of the success that you've achieved?
I think it's free to dream. It costs you nothing to dream, and get to know yourself first. Get to know what is the environment that you envision for yourself. In which environment are you going to be happy? So my advice will be that get to know yourself well, and it's free to dream. Dream, and if you believe that you can be something, you definitely can.
We'd like to thank all of our guests for sharing their stories with us. It seems that they all believe upward mobility still exists today in America. So from the land of opportunity, stay focused, keep moving forward, and you be well.
But if you look at it in relative terms, a lot of people would say that we're not as well off, and I think relative is what matters, because as I write in the article, we don't peg ourselves to our parents, we peg ourselves to the Joneses.
Will you talk a little bit about the divide between the richest and the poorest in America today?
I'm going to refer to Coming Apart again because I do think it's a very, very interesting look. And this is someone he's on the right. I tend to think of myself more as a liberal, but I think that some interesting points are being made in that there's an entire cultural divide now between the upper middle class and the upper classes in this country and the working class in terms of education, which is the base of the pyramid. That's where it all starts, really, because education is, as you know, is the #1 factor in terms of mobility. If you don't have that, your chances of getting up the ladder really are slim. So these people are more highly educated. Their lives are different. They tend to get married and stay married more than, say, a working class person would. No moral judgment on that, but what it does mean is they tend to be richer. You tend to be not operating with one income. You tend to have more stability. There's all different sorts of ways in which their lives are different. Their habits are different. Their political values are different. So we're really creating a bifurcated society here, and I do think that that's a risk for democracy.
What about the real estate market? How has that impacted things?
That's a huge missing link that I think people don't speak enough about. So, there was a lot of talk during the Clinton administration and later in the book years of creating an opportunity society by allowing people to buy homes. And certainly while home ownership has been an important part of the American dream, as we all know, there were an unfortunate number of flawed mortgages given to people, often fraudulently on the part of the banks, who couldn't afford them. The government, in some cases knowingly, pushed these policy ideas out because they wanted this debt to cover up this long-term problem of the hollowing middle that has been happening since the late 1970s. Basically, since the 70s, wages in this country and every other rich country in the world have been flat. And we've been trying to hide that with debt, and we can't do it anymore.
Another area that you write about that's near and dear to my heart, that is the loss of manufacturing jobs. Like you, my family were immigrants, and social mobility happened for us because my parents went to work in the mills in the city of Fitchburg. Those jobs don't exist anymore.
Well, absolutely. I mean, my father is a Turkish immigrant. He was given he was from a very poor family, peasant family really, in Turkey. He was given a scholarship to study in this country and became an engineer. This plays to some other aspects that maybe we'll come to later, but long story short, he went into the manufacturing business in the Midwest. He was part of the auto components field. He was laid off later when that area was hollowed out in the 80s. He was at an advantage in the sense that he had a college degree and was able to later start a small business, but certainly, and that's an important issue too in all of this, but certainly we felt, being in the Midwest and hearing stories from my grandparents who had it harder, they didn't have college degrees, they were immigrants as well, that this was a big issue. I mean, the death of these industries where you could work often without having a college degree has had a tremendous impact, I think.
Talking about technology and how the technology-driven economy has changed things in the past decade.
That's an area that I think people are just beginning to explore the enormous implications of. Now, I think we all have an idea that technology has hollowed out manufacturing. We can all imagine complex machines that have taken the place of workers, but what I think we don't have a clue about, period, and looking at whether they're doing better, worse, the same than their parents. And what those statistics show us is that America is falling behind, particularly in comparison to Europe, which I think is really interesting, because if we think again, to go back to the Statue of Liberty, to the generations before us, that's why people came to America. They thought it was going to be easier here. One
other important point that you make is that if you were born in 1970, in the bottom 1/5 of the socioeconomic ladder, you are far less likely to get ahead than you would have at one time.
Yeah.
I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so if you were to be in that bottom quartile in say the 50s, it would have been a lot easier to get ahead than it would be if you started out in the 70s and went till today. And I think that reflects a kind of mega shift in our economy. The period of highest growth in most of our lifetimes was from the 50s to the 70s. It was the post-war era. Europe was rebuilding. America was surging ahead. There was a tremendous amount of consolidation, growth in American industry, but globalization hadn't really taken off yet.
Right.
Once you hit the 70s, and in particular the late 70s, you start getting a lot of other countries coming online. You know, you get the emerging markets, China, you get Eastern Europe, you get a little bit later on, you get the fall of the Soviet Union and all those countries coming in. And of course, people in those places want theirs as well, but then that means many billions of more people that we have to compete with.
Are people today better off or worse off than their parents?
Well, it's interesting. There's two ways to look at it. You can look at it in absolute figures, which a lot of economists will, to be fair, and then we have to say we're better off. We actually do have more money than our parents. We have many technologies that they didn't have. I mean, you know, look at our flat screen televisions and our snazzy refrigerators and things like that.
Welcome to the Massachusetts School of Law Educational Forum. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Diane Sullivan. Moving up in America, pursuing the American dream. This is a topic near and dear to our hearts and the mission of our law school. For we believe that intelligent people who work enormously hard can achieve anything that they desire. Education drives upward mobility. From an early age on, our parents instilled in us that in order to get ahead, you need to get an education and you need to work hard. Is that still possible today, or is the American dream dying? Rana Foroohar, assistant managing editor of Time magazine, wrote an interesting article on this subject entitled, "Whatever Happened to Upward Mobility?"
Well, I think the idea of being an opportunity society is crucial to our self-image as Americans. It's what this nation was built on. Many of our families, certainly my family, my father was an immigrant, my grandparents, people come here thinking that they're going to have an easier way up the socioeconomic ladder than their parents did. And I think that that's what America is known for here and abroad.
Do you believe that the American dream, as we all knew it growing up, is still very much alive today?
I think that a lot of people still believe in the dream. They believe that they can strive for the dream. We did a poll, actually, a Time Money Magazine poll last year, asking people about the American dream. And even though everyone believes that their children can still have it, a lot of people feel that they themselves cannot have it. And I think the statistics show that the dream is getting harder.
You write in your article that as long as people are working hard and they believe that they can get ahead, that social inequality in the present term does not bother them because it's this dream, this Christmas tomorrow, that makes people more complacent or more optimistic. I wonder if you'd comment on that.
Well, I think you've hit on a really important point, which defines so much of our political and state structures in this country. There is a belief, and you can see it in surveys, that as long as we've got a shot at being rich, we don't mind if there's a lot of inequality. We don't mind if there's the Henry Kravitzes and the Koch brothers, you know, as long as we can have our McMansion too. But that gap, that belief starts narrowing. When you feel that the system is rigged, then people start worrying a lot more about inequality.
Discuss, if you would, the significance of Occupy Wall Street. What did that mean in our culture?
Wow, I think it meant so much. I was shocked, to be honest, as somebody that covers economics and business, that it didn't happen a lot earlier. We were all waiting, all of us, after the fall of Lehman Brothers, for there to be mass protests, and we all wrote these sort of, you know, we're all socialists now covers, and that didn't come to pass. But I think that after a few years, the patience of even Americans that are willing to put up with a lot in terms of inequality was exhausted, and I think that that's what you saw in these movements.
What evidence either supports or refutes the idea that it is harder to get ahead today?
Well, there's been a number of studies done, or studies that I should say have been done over the last several decades that are now being reported on, looking at intergenerational mobility. And what that means is taking a person from the time that they're coming of age and coming into the workplace until the time that they have children, so about a 20-year